Hey friends, Tamie M Joyce here, Empowerment Life Coach. And what I want to talk to you about today is how to spot a narcissist fast. But before I begin this video, I just want to quickly announce that we have a few spots available in the calendar this week for the free one-to-one consult with either myself or a member of my team. So if you'd like to learn more about working with me in my 8-week transformational coaching program, the Freedom Class, be sure to check out the links in the description below where you can apply to see if you qualify for a free one-on-one consultation with us. And with that, let's get started. For the best advice on how to heal and recover from codependency and narcissistic abuse, subscribe to my channel and hit that bell to be sure to be notified when I post new videos throughout the week. So let's talk about how to spot a narcissist fast. First and foremost, I want to remind you that when we're talking about these issues, it's important to remember that destructive narcissism actually happens on a continuum, on a spectrum. It's a sliding scale. These are never black or white issues. It's not like when we're pregnant, you either are or you aren't. Destructive narcissism, people who have this personality disorder, diagnosed or not, people who have narcissistic traits all the way to undiagnosed sociopathy or psychopathy. It all takes place on a sliding scale, on a spectrum. So it's vital that we remember this when we're trying to determine who and what it is that we're actually dealing with, because, as I said, these are never black or white issues, right? So the traits that we're going to talk about today will manifest differently with different people, but they are surefire telltale signs that it's likely you're dealing with someone who, at the very least, has narcissistic traits, if not lands on the spectrum of destructive narcissism. Okay, so let's go. First and foremost, first sign is contempt and disdain. When you encounter anyone in any area of your life who is targeting either you or anyone else with unprovoked and unwarranted contempt and disdain, that's a surefire sign that you're dealing with someone who lands on the spectrum of destructive narcissism. Healthy people don't go around looking for reasons to target others. Healthy people don't need to prop themselves up with a false sense of superiority by looking down their nose at everyone else, judging and criticizing everyone else, coming up with reasons as to why others, another individual or group of individuals, is beneath them, right? So anyone who shows up in any area of your life targeting you or anyone else in front of you with unwarranted and unprovoked contempt and disdain, beware. Chances are good you're dealing with someone who lands on the spectrum of destructive narcissism. Next on the list, perception manipulation. If you encounter anyone in any area of your life who is working really hard, sometimes even overtime, to control or manipulate your perception, huge red flag. They may be working to control your perception of them. They're working real hard, they're working overtime to convince you of what an amazing human being they are, how much they've done for their family, humanity, whatever it is, right? But the point being, it's very clear that they're working really hard to convince you, to sell you, to manipulate and control your perception of them, or working really hard to manipulate and control your perception of others. Again, huge red flag that you're dealing with someone who lands on the spectrum of destructive narcissism. Healthy people, even reasonably, relatively healthy people, I mean, we all have our stuff, right? None of us are perfect, but reasonably healthy people have nothing to prove. They show up as who they are, take it or leave it, and they don't have to spend a lot of energy selling themselves, convincing you, attempting to manipulate and control your perception of them. And they certainly aren't in the business of manipulating and controlling your perception of anyone else. They've got better things to do with their psychic energy, their emotional energy, their time, the time that they spend with you, right? So again, huge red flag. anyone who's trying to manipulate your perception of either them or anyone else, good chance you're dealing with someone who at the very least has narcissistic traits, if not actually lands on the spectrum of destructive narcissism. Next on the list, smug. Have you ever noticed that there are certain individuals who will go around, they'll have their favorite targets, of course, but they'll go around and poke, provoke, prod, target, diminish, demean, insult, often under the guise of some sick, distorted sense of humor, but really go out of their way to diminish, demean, target, provoke, harm another. And when they've done so, sit back with smug on their face, literally, like they're getting a sick kick out of having knocked this person off balance, or hurt this person's feelings, or caught them off guard, or put them down publicly somehow. They literally sit back with smug on their face, getting a sick kick, getting their particular version of narcissistic supply, because they've succeeded in hurting someone, diminishing someone, demeaning someone, and you can see it because it's written all over their face with smug. You see someone sitting there with smug on their face, having caused someone any level of harm, big red flag, you're dealing with someone who lands on the spectrum of destructive narcissism. Again, reasonably healthy people don't need to play these games. They don't take joy and pride in putting others down. They aren't so pathologically envious and insecure and fear-based that they need to play these games of one-upmanship in order to feel okay about themselves in the moment, right? In order to prop themselves up with this false sense of superiority. Reasonably healthy people don't need to do that. Destructive narcissists, however, they'll do it all day long. Huge red flag. Next on the list, toxic gossip. In any area of your life, when you encounter someone whose modus operandi is to speak negatively about, criticize, condemn, diminish, demean, disclose personal details that any decent human being would never say out loud. When they are doing that to whoever happens to either be out of earshot or whoever happens to not be in the room, and they show you more than once that this is who they are toxic gossips, always looking for the person to speak negatively about, typically very much behind their back, smiling to their face and stabbing them in the back the moment they're out of earshot or out of the room. Healthy people don't need to do this. You fully have to be lacking in empathy and lacking in conscience to go through life conducting yourself in this fashion. You really do. If you know that you have developed somewhere along the way a bad habit of gossiping in a negative fashion about others, you might want to check yourself. You might want to listen to that guilt feeling that you get inside. I know if I catch myself in that kind of behavior, we've all been guilty of it at one time or another, especially if we're feeling any sort of frustration or disappointment or whatever it may be, right? I feel the guilt. I feel the shame the moment. Why? Because I have empathy, I have a conscience, and as a decent human being with a heart full of love and good intent, I choose to hold myself to a higher standard. When we're talking about people who land on the spectrum of destructive narcissism, they don't hold themselves to that higher standard. They don't get the guilt and the shame feelings when they're not living up to their own higher standard for themselves, right? This is how they go through life, looking for ways, looking for opportunities to put others down so that they can feel okay about themselves in the moment. And often they do this through toxic gossip. And I'd go as far as to say, often they are fully addicted to being toxic gossips. They are gossip addicts. And I'll tell you something in my own experience, men are as guilty, if not more so, of this than women. In my previous career, I worked in an environment surrounded by men, great men to a large degree, but many of them were full-blown gossip addicts. And those that were full-blown gossip addicts were also folks who I would say land on the spectrum of destructive narcissism. It kind of goes hand in hand, it seems. It's one of the ways that a narcissist will compensate for, their absolute runaway low self-esteem. It may not be obvious that they have absolute runaway low self-esteem under the surface because they're so grandiose, not always, but often so grandiose and so adept at, projecting this image that would suggest the opposite. But make no mistake, anyone who makes a habit or a lifestyle of gossiping in a toxic, destructive, negative fashion about others is lacking in empathy, is lacking in conscience, and therefore likely lands on the spectrum of destructive narcissism. Now, comment below and let me know whether or not you've encountered these traits in any individual, and if so, who were they? Next on the list, passive-aggressive communication and behavior. Attempting to manipulate and control you through passive-aggressive behavior. How this shows up is the silent treatment, sulking, pouting, sighing, rolling of eyes, disapproving looks, glares, clenched jaw. The energy that comes off of them is enough to be a passive-aggressive communication towards you, right? So anyone who is passive-aggressively communicating through any of the aforementioned is likely someone who, at the very least, has narcissistic traits, if not landing on the spectrum of destructive narcissism. Healthy people don't need to play these games. They don't need to do the passive-aggressive nonsense to get their point across, to manipulate you emotionally or control you in any way. They show up, they communicate clearly, they say what they mean what they say, right? Destructive narcissists, on the other hand, don't know how to do that. They fully do not have the equipment or the capacity to do that for many reasons that are beyond the scope of this video. But suffice to say, if you have anyone in your life, in any area of your life, who communicates through passive-aggressive communication and behavior, sulks, pouts, sighs, rolls their eyes, whispers behind your back when you're just out of earshot, all that sort of nonsense, good chance you're dealing with a destructive narcissist. Next on the list, easily offended, easily slighted. In other words, without even realizing it, you've caused narcissistic injury. If you have anyone in any area of your life who, out of the blue, they're hurt, angry, and you have no idea what you've done, they are so easily offended, so easily slighted, always on the defensive, chances are good you're dealing with someone, again, who at the very least has narcissistic traits, if not fully lands on the spectrum of destructive narcissism. This one's really fascinating because we can be going through life, minding our own business, doing our own thing, and all of a sudden, out of the blue, like, apparently, we've done something and we have no idea what we've done. The reality is, it's not our stuff. As decent human beings with a kind heart, empathy, a conscience, even if we accidentally, fully by accident, step on someone's toes, hurt someone's feelings, we're going to acknowledge that right away. We're going to take ownership of that right away. We're going to apologize, fix that, make an amends, make it right as quickly as possible. That's what decent, reasonably healthy human beings do, right? But problem is when you're dealing with someone who lands on the spectrum of destructive narcissism, who is so hypersensitive, so easily offended, so easily slighted, those of us who are high empathy individuals find ourselves in a situation where we don't even know what we did, and we're feeling compelled to apologize and take responsibility for things that aren't our responsibility. Bottom line is, if you didn't do anything that you should be apologizing for on purpose or by accident, you don't owe anybody an apology. You don't. It's vital that we recognize where we end and they begin. That's called healthy boundaries, right? So if you encounter anyone in any area of your life who gets so easily offended, so easily slighted, when you've done absolutely nothing to warrant, to cause that sort of offense or harm or slight or what have you, recognize that it's not your stuff. And you only need to take responsibility for anything that you've actually done, again, intentionally or accidentally, that would cause harm. If you haven't done anything, I'll give you an example from my own life on this one, because it was fascinating. What was hilarious about this particular situation was the individual had no idea who he was dealing with. But, you know, a few years ago, my guy and I were at a function, and I was headed to go get something out of my purse, which meant I was walking past the front door at this particular function. And as I was passing the front door, this couple, older than me, came walking through the front door. And as you would, it was Christmas time. I'm at this Christmas party. So as you would, or as I would anyway, I think it's normal behavior. I said, hello, hi, my name is Tammy, Merry Christmas. And I reached out my hand to introduce myself as this couple was entering. And the wife was as lovely as can be. And she shook my hand and said, my name is so-and-so and Merry Christmas and how nice to meet you. And you must be so-and-so and yada, yada. And the husband was all in a tizzy, and as far as I could tell, he came through the door that way, but that had nothing to do with me. And I was just being polite at this function at Christmas time. And I turned around and I said, and you are? And the moment I did that, he was offended. That's all I did, was reach my hand out to introduce myself and say Merry Christmas. And that is all it took. And this individual proceeded to target me in the most passive aggressive, under the radar, sneaky, subtle way where no one else could see, but with the rolling of the eyes and the sighs and the shaking of the head and the turning of the back all night long. He proceeded to target me because I offended him. I slighted him by greeting him at the front door of a Christmas function. As they came through the door, stuck up my hand to introduce myself. That's all it took. I actually have probably a few dozen examples just like that of high spectrum destructive narcissists who showed me immediately who they were and what I was dealing with by virtue of something absolutely ludicrous, like that silly, that simple, and that's who they are. That's who they are. So hypersensitive, so insecure, so fear-based, so needing to prop themselves up with a false sense of superiority that they're looking for opportunities to be offended. And anything will do, and anything will do. And God forbid you should be the person like I was at that particular function who gets in the way and then, you know, as I said, ends up being targeted for the rest of the evening. Again, what was hilarious was he had absolutely no idea who he was dealing with. So all of his stuff just landed where it did. And I did what I needed to do to take care of me. And that was the end of it. But it's fascinating. Can you imagine how excruciatingly painful it must be to go through life so hypersensitive that the slightest breeze, the absolute slightest minuscule anything is enough to set you off? What a horrible way to go through life. I have absolutely nothing but compassion for an individual like that from a distance. So with all of that said, my little rant, sharing from my personal experience, if you encounter anyone in any area of your life who is that easily offended, slighted, gets defensive. Got another individual in my life who defensive, so defensive it's painful. It's difficult to have a conversation about the weather with this particular individual because no matter what is said, they are on the defense. If you have anyone in your life who shows up with that type of hypersensitivity that they are so easily offended and so easily slanted, chances are really, really good so easily slighted is what I meant to say, chances are really, really good that you are dealing with someone who lands on the spectrum of destructive narcissism. That is a huge red flag. Last but not least, they are predators. They are predators. So this is, among all of them, the most vital sign to pay attention to. Know that even the most covert, vulnerable, sneaky narcissist is a predator looking for targets. So when you enter the field of any individual, we all have a field, an energetic field around us. So when your field enters the field of another individual and your body reacts with any message, any form of discomfort, suddenly you're feeling anxious and you don't know why. All of a sudden your stomach's in knots and you don't know why. All of a sudden you're feeling triggered or agitated or uncomfortable and you don't know why. Pay attention. Huge red flag, in fact, that you are dealing with someone at the highest end of the spectrum. Often these people can be so incredibly charming. We're hearing the words and our mind is telling us one thing, but our body is telling us another. Here's the thing. Your mind will lie to you all day long. This is something that someone from my past said to me many years ago, and I never forgot it because it's so true. She said, Tammy, your mind will lie to you all day long. Your body will never lie to you. And it is so true. When your body is telling you something different than what your mind is telling you, go with what your body's telling you. Trust your body. Trust your vibes. Huge red flag when entering the field of another individual and your body is reacting. That is not something to ignore. That is not something to talk yourself out of. That is not something to make excuses for. That is something always to pay attention to. My friends, I hope you got some value out of this today. If you liked what you heard, remember to like, comment, give it a share if you think that you have some friends who might benefit from it. And if you haven't done so already, if you're new to my channel, be sure to subscribe and hit that bell so you get alerted when I do post new videos throughout the week. And with that, I'm going to call it a wrap. Just quickly, one more time, if you'd like to learn more about the possibility of working with me in my 8-week transformational coaching program, the Freedom Class, be sure to click the link in the description below to apply to see if you qualify for a free one-to-one consult with myself or a member of my team. And as always, I will leave you with this. Know your value. Know your value and unlock your freedom. Thanks so much for watching, and we'll catch you next time. Bye for now.